Well, welcome, K-Bhava Kristi Corlett. I'm so excited to be able to have a chat with you today about ravens and crows and the significance and the deliciousness of these magical creatures. And I think so many people can relate to this in their lives, and I'm really excited to dive in. First of all, though, I want to introduce you in case anyone isn't familiar with your magnificence. K-Bhava is a yoga educator. She's a shamanic practitioner and has been for many moons. And she is an author. She's a musician. I mean, you have so many things. There's so many things that you do. You're also an editor, so you do wordsmithing for folks. You have a beautiful kaleidoscope of offerings at silverbow.ca. So folks can certainly check in with you there. And one of the reasons I wanted to highlight your services is because I've used them myself many times. Certain times when I've just felt like I was struggling and I needed to have that earth presence in my life and really connect in to the earth in a deeper way. And you've led me in some beautiful directions in terms of my own healing. So thank you, thank you, thank you.
Oh, thank you, Tamika. Thanks for having me today. It's always a pleasure and a joy to be together. So,
Yeah, it's exciting. We're talking about the power of raven and crows today. I think many people have that connection to, or they've had some interaction with those birds. Do you want to say anything about what it means to have a power animal, or how you would describe that for anyone that doesn't know about it?
okay, so in what we might call the shamanic realms or in earth based teachings, a power animal, and that terminology does come from indigenous sources, is a spirit helper who shows itself, who manifests itself in animal form. So that could be four-legged animal, from an elephant to a chipmunk. It could be a winged one like a chickadee or raven or crow. It could be a fish. One would be surprised who supports one or how they show up in the shamanic realms. And the power animal is present in order to protect us from unnecessary bad luck, their companion who walks beside us in our spiritual practice, a wise advisor. So I like to tell yogis that power animal is like your shamanic foot foundation. They are your support. They are your constant companion.
That's amazing. And I know some people they learn with you how to guide folks through a power animal journey, or you do that for folks. They can get that experience with you if they want to work with a guide. But also, would you say that some people have power animals and they're not even maybe even tapped into this shamanic work, or they're not even really aware of it, but they do have power animals in their lives?
They do say that a power animal, when there's work done to identify a power animal, or the terminology might be retrieve a power animal, at least in the form of shamanism that I practice, that power animal has always been with us. It's simply that they're stepping forward to remind us again of their presence, or sometimes a power animal can be lost to us through disrespect of self or disrespect of that animal in our own living, in our own speak, and simply that they're stepping forward as they're needed to support us with the qualities and the gifts that they bring. And of course, this is the practice that I do, which is more in the Celtic tradition. For folks who are indigenous, they may have a very different way of accessing and learning about their power animal by doing an actual vision quest in nature, where they're by themselves, they're fasting, and they come into relationship that way, through visioning or actual encounter with their power animal. So the way I work with it is more through doing shamanic journey work with drum and rattle.
I love that. And I love the clarification around the roots of your practice and the honoring of the Indigenous peoples. And I noticed that on your site as well, that you honor the land. I mean, you are living in the hollow, in the woods, like really close to earth. You are so authentic in what you are teaching and sharing with people in terms of also just the way that you're living your life. It's just so beautiful how you not incorporate, not appropriate, but you really distinguish, here's what this work is, here's where I come from, and here's my place in all of this. And you also step into that place really gracefully and honor Indigenous folks. So I love this.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, it's something we need to be aware of as Westerners, or non-Indigenous people, and that this is only one way. This is only one way, and perhaps indeed the not the most ancient way. I mean, we have so much to learn from our Indigenous peoples, and trying to remind myself to be sensitive and aware in a sort of significant way. I feel like I'm greatly humbled, and that I have so much to learn from our Indigenous peoples. And maybe I'll mention it. One time when I was teaching the course that I taught for David Tree, Whispered Wisdom, which is an introduction to the dance of shamanism and yoga and how they interweave, I had a student who was of Indigenous background, and she was struggling with the drum style journey method because she already, in walking in nature, had experiences and received messages and contact with her power animals and helping spirits directly in nature. It was really wonderful to have her in the course to give that perspective, because there's not one way. There's not one right way to do it.
Yeah, and I can only imagine that you wouldn't be her guide. You would be her ally on the side, when you would be workshopping this together as in that scenario, and having her share her wisdom. Because as you said, like, how can we speak of this besides humbly, because we're two white women having a conversation about this. I think it really is important to acknowledge that and just honor. And that's what I always feel from you, is just such deep honoring.
Oh, thank you.
But also the way that you embody your life, you are also allowed to step into that power. And, when we come to a certain place in our hearts, I think we don't abuse power. So I love it that you can also step into that position that you have.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, it's something to remember every day. What is power, and that we can be conduits. We can be conduits for power, in that we open ourselves to the flow of grace, to the flow of spirit, and it resides in our heart, your heart, my heart, the heart of every being, which is a basic shamanic principle. It is.
Well, going back to this idea of everyday power animals, can you clarify when you were saying about people the disrespect piece, that they might, were you saying that they might not recognize the magnitude of the force and intelligence of the natural world in their lives, and then that animal can bring them back to knowing? Or I just wanted to clarify that piece.
It's interesting, because also, if we aren't aware of our power animal, there is a chance that they've distanced, or we've distanced ourselves from them, essentially. It's not that they're not present as an aspect of spirit. I have a wonderful story about this that I tell often. I was once in a training group with one of my teachers, Sharon Van Rald, and I tell my students this all the time. We were discussing our journey. We had journeyed to meet a power animal, a helping spirit in animal form, and everybody was talking about, oh, well, I met wolf, or I met bear, or and then somebody said, well, I got turtle, and I was kind of expecting something a little different. And in her deep wisdom, Sharon, who was teaching for the Foundation for Shamanic Studies, she was facilitating this weekend, she said, well, it's a really wonderful thing, because spirit is so deeply compassionate. And that's all she said. She did not make a judgy statement about what the person had said. But in saying that, I mean, there was a bit of a, in the circle, denigrating the importance of turtle. Is the power of turtle is immense, and it doesn't matter what size your power animal is, and that can be a way of, in our sort of lack of awareness, that we could diss our power animal, by saying, well, I got mouse, I got snake, what's that about ant? What? And it's like, no, there's a teaching there for us. Like, there is immense power. If all things are ensouled and infused with source, then it doesn't matter what size or shape, or if you had an aversion, for instance, to a certain animal and they show up for you, which happened to me recently with a client. They're like, oh, I always felt a little bit of a revulsion to that animal. And then, but they were like, but clearly I'm supposed to meet this energy and dance with it now. Like, they got it, right? They got it, and so that was fascinating to me.
Yeah, that makes sense. And that sometimes I'm sure that even with you just speaking about this today, it will sort of like sharpen us to wake up to the everyday creatures that we run across, and that they are significant no matter how their size or cuddly factor or whatever it is that we might be attached to. So ravens and crows, tell us first about Raven. Like, I'm so curious what you would say Raven is here to teach us.
Oh my goodness. Who am I to say? But I live in a place I call Ravenwood Hollow because there are ravens. There's a nesting pair up above in the pine forest, and they're constantly with their babes every year, flying over and doing their acrobatics and showing themselves. And of course, so we'll all have impressions if we've had the privilege of meeting Raven, because most of us have met a crow in ordinary reality. We've met a crow, but we don't know the difference between crows and ravens. And I don't know, they're very closely related. We do know from our Indigenous friends that share about Raven, how Raven is a trickster, and Raven does help us negotiate difficult places by stimulating, in unexpected ways, stimulating our heart, our consideration. In the Celtic tradition with which I'm more versed, Raven is an agent of transformation, transmutation, dancing with the shadow. And these are all general qualities, because if a person has a raven as a power animal, there will be specific exchange between that person and their animal. But Raven is such a powerful figure. Raven is associated in the Celtic realms with the giant Bran, who Bran was a great hero in the tradition, and of course they say that his head was buried in the hill that now houses the Tower of London. His head was protecting the Great Britain and the Celtic realms for many years, as long as it should be buried there. And now they keep ravens at the Tower of London in that same tradition that goes back to the Druidic tradition of Raven as a protecting spirit. So there's protection. There's also an association with the dark goddesses of the Celtic realms, like the Morrigan or Mab or Bab, that were the goddesses who raged above the battlefield and collected the dead warriors. So Raven is associated with that as well. So some people are very terrified of ravens. I mean, you think of the ominous, Edgar Allan Poe, raven rapping on his chamber door, and how that was this dark, heavy, disturbing presence in some ways for him, but Raven being a harbinger of transition, and Raven unafraid of that place between life and death, that betwixt and between place.
Is there any other way besides size to tell the difference between crow and raven? Like, that's the only thing that I've been able to determine the difference, is that ravens are just so massively big.
They're large, and in the physical world, and there's some wonderful videos about this on YouTube that are super fun to watch, because they show you both. They have different flight patterns. Ravens tend to have this sort of circular, widening circular flight pattern. Crows are often straight as an arrow. Look at their beaks if you can get close enough, because a raven has a thicker upper bill or beak that's like a prominent, almost like a prominent nose. And ravens will look scruffier. They'll have a beard and puffed up, depending on what their mood is. They'll have a puffed up feathers on their ears and head, and their tails are actually slightly differently. So if you watch them in flight, a raven's tail is more like a fan, and a crow's might seem a little straighter across. So there are all sorts of neat ways to tell them apart. And then their call is a giveaway, because a crow is, ah, 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 and they'll do this in a tree, and that's a crow. But ravens never go like, they don't do that and say. They can make the crow-like noises, but they also make all these crazy frog-like water noises, like more of a karak, so
You do that really well, K-Bhava. You do this really well.
I love ravens. I just love them. I mean, I watch them a lot and it's super fun, and they're dynamic. Also, when they'll do barrel rolls when they're flying. Like they'll go right around, they'll just glide and go whoop upside down, and it's so much fun to watch them. And we've got hills here, so when they bring their wings in and dive, and then it's fascinating.
I read somewhere or heard somewhere that ravens, when a human has done something kind for them, that they will tell their whole group, their whole, is it a, no, it's a murder of crows, isn't it? They'll tell the rest of
conspiracy of ravens.
Yeah, I love it. A conspiracy? No.
I believe so. I could have that wrong.
Oh, man, that's really interesting right now. So that they will tell their clan, and then that clan will start acting differently toward the human. Like crow, they can speak, right? Like they could talk if they wanted to, but what happens to birds that can talk, like parrots and stuff? They're caged. They're literally lose their freedom. So I don't know if this is true or if there's any hint of truth in this, but that they're so intelligent that they won't talk, even though they could mimic us more and start doing that, because then we would try to capture them and domesticate them. But they care about freedom so much.
They really do. Like ravens, crows also, but ravens are very, like, I was walking one day along the road here in the forest, and there were three younger ravens flying from tree to tree sort of near me, and one landed and the other two went on, and he was right on a branch, and I wanted to see him. He was beautiful with his glossy feathers, and they're so big and lovely, and so I wanted to meet him. Oh, but he walked around the back of the tree, and he wouldn't let me privacy. Yeah, he wouldn't let me look right at him. So they're extremely intelligent, and they know what we are doing. They watch, and they know, and they keep, like, we've still never found the nest of the nesting pair here. We know, we have an approximation of where it is, but they place their nest very, very high in trees. They get really quiet during the initial nesting times, and when the babies are little, I notice early spring. Right now they're quite quiet. They've probably got a brood going. They usually have a brood of several, at least 3 if they do well and they thrive. And so right now they're a little bit quiet here at the Hollow. So they know a lot of things. There are experiments, different American universities, where they're tagging ravens and trying to track them, where they even tried one where a fellow wore a mask to do that work, like a Halloween mask, and anybody wearing that mask would be dive bombed on the campus. And they seem to be able to communicate that down the generations. It's not completely understood how they communicate and create this collective memory. It's by Bernd Heinrich, and it's called Mind of the Raven. Mm-hmm. And he's a biologist, and it's fascinating. He looks at, I mean, if you're interested in the science aspects, because we're talking more about the mystical, spiritual stuff. So you'll see that contrast, whereas raven in non-ordinary reality or as a power animal might be very bold. Ravens are very shy. In his experience, having kept ravens and also studied them in the wild, that they don't like anything that's new is suspicious. And they take their time figuring it out, and they might leave it sitting there for several days before they'll even go up and nudge it. And their brains are large, and they're... Yeah,
that makes sense to me in terms of living on Salt Spring. The one, I was there for 4 years, but the one place that I lived for 3 years, and you were there, and you know that you could hear the wings in the air because they were always there. But it took them like over a year to be comfortable enough to not fly away from the shed. Like we would do our morning walks and around the properties, and it took them about a year before they wouldn't take off when I was even walking like very far away. Not even that close. So that's really, really interesting.
It is, and they're intensely, I think they're intensely private. It's hard to tell because in different areas of the world they behave differently. Some places in the world they'll nest close together with other pairs, and other places they're very far away from other pairs, like their territory is larger, and it seems to vary, so it's not completely consistent. I mean, at least my experience of Raven, who shows up a lot for me when I'm doing journey work, Raven is bold. Raven is authoritative and tricky sometimes. Sometimes it's challenging to get clarity.
One of the things I'm most interested in about Raven is that they, in mythology, if we get back to the sort of spiritual, mythological, more.
Imaginal, yeah.
Yeah, yes, exactly, exactly. But I don't want to also make it seem like it isn't real, because it's very interesting that some traditions call them the keeper of secrets. They can help us see the secrets that we've withheld from ourselves. And I'm sure all of the animals do that in different ways, but I find it interesting that they're associated with that. I think, I've written a book about speaking your truth, and sometimes that speaking your truth which is coming out in the fall, by the way, but
Yeah,
sometimes, yay.
I'm signing up.
Sometimes that truth is just something that we're hiding from ourselves. We don't need to speak it to others. We just really need to acknowledge it and like look it in the eye. And I love this about Raven, that they are associated with that, showing us the truths that we've hidden from ourselves.
I love that. And I've had the privilege of being in class with you when you were encouraging us to do some truth archaeology, which is this amazing practice and revealing practice. And that idea that, and Raven doesn't flinch from going deep. I think I just did. Yeah, this is coming back to me. I was just in Journey with Raven the other day because I was preparing for this interview, and Raven said, "Oh, I go deep. I don't flinch about going deep and talking about picking at the bones, the painful, the shadow things." I mean, the term shadow work is extremely popular these days, particularly in spiritual wellness. But Raven is such a great ally for that deep dive. Whether it's a deep dive into the wound, to pick around and pull out the things that we need to look at, or whether it's cleaning the wound, and getting rid of all of the rotten things that we need to let go of, the things that are no longer useful to us. So when we can speak disrespectfully of raven or crow as carry-on birds, who pick at the roadkill or whatever, but in terms of their spiritual service to us, that picking at the things that, and really looking at and examining the things that are not needed, that are injured, that are run down, that are, all those things can. So Raven's a great clearer, a great mover of energy. And I can't help but think about right now, I'm really thinking about Raven's association in Sanatana Dharma, in Hinduism, with Kali and Shiva, who help us move the darker energies so that we can release what's not needed. And there it is. Raven's one of their animals for sure, right? You'll often see in the iconography, you'll see a raven.
It is fascinating. And when you're saying this, like, I love the way that you speak of it, because people don't realize that. I mean, and picking at the bones sounds so sort of gory and graphic, but people don't realize that that's where the joy comes from. Like, it's literally the springboard of doing that darker work and being able to face difficult things within ourselves. You don't have to go public, but just being able to look at yourself and just look at the little ways that we might not be living authentically even. And then when we can do that, we springboard into like so much more access to joy. And I know that it is popular, the shadow work, and people do that, but I think still there's so many areas of our lives where we avoid really being honest with ourselves, or even just our intimate partners or our parents or our children or, our besties. If we can't do it there, how is this world ever going to be honest? And the raven to me is the symbol of not only am I here and I'm showing up, but I've got you.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And I'm gonna push you a little bit too. I'm gonna push you.
Yeah. Yeah. And it might be uncomfortable, a little bit uncomfortable.
This is the relief that we obtain when we actually do that dance, when we actually move through that difficult place is that we really might hate it at the moment, or we might resist going, I'm not going to tell anybody about that. I'm not going to
Yeah.
talk about that. I'm not even going to look at that because it freaks me out and I get upset. But when we move through it, the resistance may be causing the suffering far more than the moving through and looking at the truth. And I know that I'm preaching to the choir right now.
No, no,
Wait
you're
to
you're
read that
teaching
book of
you're
yours.
teaching all of us. I'm not exempt from this practice. Like for me, the work around truth aches, like when something aches because you're not being truthful, it's a birth to death. It's like your whole life. You don't actually master it and you're done. If that happens to you, you're probably going to transition because you're probably not not here for any big learning anymore. If we switch gears and talk a little bit more about crow, I know there are some similar things between crow and raven, right? But like that, they have that jet black color, and that there's a trickster element there too that's sometimes associated with them. But people do talk about that harbinger of death and the pick, like similar, right? There's some similar things. And how would you distinguish them?
Wow, that's an interesting question, and I don't know how clear I can get on that. But I mean, I've worked with both of them, and sometimes I find crow a little more humorous and funny. I don't know. That's been in my experience. Sometimes a little more celebratory and less somber, a little more shouted outy. Maybe if Raven were the introvert, Crow is the extrovert. I don't know. And a less solitary. Crows are very often seen in large gatherings, whereas it's more unusual to see large gatherings of ravens. So what does that mean about community and how comfortable we are with large groups and that sort of thing? You'd almost have to ask your raven or ask your crow. Crows are so interesting. I mean, I grew up in southwestern Ontario and had never seen a raven until I started coming to northern and eastern Ontario. So I was used to the crow, loud and brassy and funny and cocky, although as a power animal they may not be cocky, but they might address that in us, and just the way that they strut. I mean, but yes, and if we look at, again, I'll go to the Celtic traditions because that's where I'm more versed, but they're often associated with one another. And so crow or raven, they're both corvids. They're both that same family of birds that's grouped with like blue jays and rooks and that sort of thing. Very intelligent, again, intensely intelligent. For me right now, as I think about it, I think of raven as more deliberate, reserved in some ways, almost more remote. Whereas I find crow just like right in there, like, yeah, here I am, and yeah, baby, and the Austin Powers of the two, I don't know. Not to insult crow. I had a friend who was expecting a babe, and when I journeyed for her, I was told it was crow. And Crow was like, "This is my baby," and so we still call this little girl who's now school age and going to public school. We still call her Crow Baby,
Oh,
and she's just like, "Hey, I'm gonna sing you a punk rock song now,"
wow.
and she's hilarious. She had an ear infection and she went to the doctor, and the doctor said to her, Mom was watching, and the doctor said, "So how does that ear feel?" And she said, "Like an ear."
What a sassy young thing, huh? I love
Yeah,
it.
yeah, and maybe sassy is what I think of when I think of crow.
Yeah,
Just confident and
yeah,
which is the sunny side of cocky is confident. I am who I am.
yeah. And willing to play the fool too.
Yes. And that's an interesting point because we think we use fool as a sort of an insult, or we look down on people who are foolish, or we don't like to be seen as foolish. We like to be dignified, and yet in playing the fool we can bring out so many things: laughter, joy. It's an antidote to being arrogant. The fool in the old courts was kept to prod people into speaking their truth.
Yes.
Or the
This
cool.
I didn't mean for this to come up so much about speaking our truth, but it really is interesting that both these birds are speakers. And I see what you mean about more introverted with the raven, and yet they're also make all these noises, like you said, the popping and the I remember at the retreat house on Salt Spring, I used to think that there was a it was an alarm going off. They can make all these like technical sounds, like they sound like there's a there's some kind of alarm going off, and I'm like, what is that? So but both of them, and then the crows just being so out there with, they don't care, they're just speaking it really
Yeah,
loud,
and well, I think of jays too. I mean, if, not so much the gray jay, which they seem to be a little quieter, but blue jays
yeah,
are corvids too, and they are the same. They are blue. Let's talk about the throat chakra, right? And speaking our
yeah,
truth, and they are brassy, and they are loud and piercing. And isn't that fascinating? I mean, this
yeah,
is where qualities come from. This is where, in our deep imagination or in non-ordinary reality, these qualities that we observe in nature inform our impression of these helping spirits, in the form of animals, and what is it about what we need to say? What is it about who we need to be and how we reveal ourselves that these spirits are teaching us, that these characters or archetypes, if you don't like the idea of spirit, are teaching us? There's so
yeah,
much to learn, and we've got a big problem. I think really your book is coming out at a wonderful time, because we've got a big problem with speaking our truth, and speaking our truth with compassion,
yeah.
and looking at even what our truth could possibly be, and releasing all the things that we need to get rid of, letting those things die so that we can come into a rebirth level. Well, here we are in spring, right? So coming
Yeah.
into that rebirthing time, the newness and the shininess can't come out if we don't do a little bit of cleaning house.
That's so true, picking at those bones.
Yeah, picking the bones, picking the bones. And that's always, there are old medieval songs about, there's one called Two Corbies or Corbeaux, and there's two ravens sitting on a tree, and they're looking at this dead body of this knight, and they're having this discussion about how this fair lady is crying over him, but they're going to pick his bones later. So they're having this discussion. And that's where we get this revulsion. Oh, they're death birds, but when we see it from that other side, that they're removing what isn't needed in order to create transition, in
Mm.
order to make space, there's this deep compassion that service shows forth. Like, it's not easy to be seen as the death bird. It's not easy to be seen as the carrion bird, or the one who deals in shadow. And yet I'm always reminded again and again that they're taking on symbolically a sacrificial function that allows us to heal. It takes a lot of strength and depth to be able to be that transmutational energy, to represent that.
It's not always popular, right? I talk about this in the introduction to my book, about some of the experiences I had when I first started telling people what I was writing about.
Right.
And then I realized that we have a cultural block around this. And I wouldn't even tell them really anything about the book, except that it was about speaking our truth. And I was excited to hear stories from them, so I could learn more. And then I would realize I'd hit such a cultural nerve, because suddenly I didn't want to talk about it at all, because people I didn't even know would show up with shame on their faces just for me mentioning that. And they'd start out curious about what I was writing about and then go there. So I think at this time on earth, I did not think about this when we were starting, that this would come up so much, but this whole idea of communication and the sort of dignified, use the word dignified, which is what I was thinking too about the raven, and sort of stepping back and knowing when to just listen and stay back. And maybe your truth hasn't been formulated enough, and maybe it's going to come out in violent ways, or even in forceful ways that may not serve you and the other person. So it's just kind of that stand. And then there's times when squawking and just like letting it out is going to be a part of the transition to get you to that next stage, which the crow can teach us about that squawking and about making all that noise to help free things up and to be the fool and just to let it all out. And then, of course, none of us are perfect. We'll do both things at different times.
Well, something I've noticed lately, I mean, I don't spend a lot of time on social media. It's not my favorite place to be, but sometimes I'll be scanning and I see this term ugly cry, which is a popular terminal, you know, and we all know what that is. We don't even have to, you know, like, the bawling, and it's funny that they say ugly cry because I've always been taught, my teacher taught me that we journey through our tears. And so that ugly cry is like a waterfall. It's like, you know, we don't have to be in that place all the time, but this gushing forth may be opening us to grace and the flow of grace, the waterfall of grace. Maybe there's a gentle flowing river of grace, but sometimes we have to go over the, you know, go over the falls, and it's not always seemingly graceful, but that ugly cry is instrumental to letting go, sometimes to a big release like we might have after, you know, a psoas release or some other open-hearted posture in yoga. And it's essential. The ugliness is important, and we need to dance with both the beauty and the ugliness.
And if you can't have the ugly cry once in a while, you're not going to have as much laughter, right? I mean, there's also a point where you might be in that cry mode too much, and it might be hard on your adrenals, and it might be, there's all that. But we both know that that's a whole other thing. Most people can emote and then move it through. I think this is so interesting in terms of what we're talking about, shadow and just the muck and the picking at the bones of these two magnificent birds, and how this is what's going on the planet. Like, we are in a difficult transition. We're in this point in the quickening, which maybe the quickening is 300 years in or maybe it's thousands of years, we don't know, but in these big cycles of 23,000 years, we're in this one where there is so much that on a collective level that needs to come up. And so the fact that we're discussing these two birds today, I just feel like, wow, this is going to tune a lot of people into when they see them, what they feel inside. Like, what do I get? What is the message? Like, do I need to be more spontaneous, or do I need to say something that I'm not saying? Or do I need to pull back and use my words more carefully and in a more dignified way? I just feel like this is really interesting because communication and how we do that right now, it's heightened. There's, I think everyone on earth is feeling there's division and there's all these things that we all know about. But so I'm so grateful to you for bringing these two birds and this clarity and awareness, and the work that you do is so important with not just these birds, but all of your services and everything that you're doing at Silver Bow. It's just so important. And I'm also so excited that you're willing to give us a little gift today, which is you're going to gift our readership with your Raven, Wolf, and Bear music. So that's super exciting. So thank you so much. Your album is called The Bridge.
Yeah.
The Bridge. And I have to congratulate you on your 1,000 hours of, you know, professional yoga teacher training. Congratulations.
Thank you so for providing the cauldron in which that could occur. It's just such a joy, and it feels to me very monumental, and just in my own practice, just for me, and so it was beautiful to have the opportunity to complete my 1,000 hours with an independent study and produce. Now this is kind of a demo quality album. I don't really have it out. I have a few songs up on my website at silverbow.ca, but what I actually did for that study was present you and Carolyn with and my faculty advisor Brenda McMorrow, the goddess of song, with an album, a collection of kirtan music and nature songs. So there's a combination there, and one of them is Raven, Wolf, and Bear. What an exercise in joy to be able to share that.
Thank you for going that deep, and that's just your commitment, and just, I know it's a commitment in lots of ways, and you just took it on and went really deep. I also want to say this is a song that I feel like when have my head set in and I'm sitting outside, it almost takes me into trance. And I whatever that means for you. For me, it means like going deeper beyond my personality and being open to much more than just my personality. So I invite anyone who's listening to this to listen to it however you wish, but it's a beautiful song to even listen to in a meditative state.
Oh, thank you. It was definitely written in an altered state. A little advice for listening to this song, please listen to it with headphones. I don't have a proper recording studio, so if you put it on your computer speakers, it won't sound so great, but headphones sounds all right.
Helps with that going deep quickly too. You just drop right in, and the drumming and the cadence of your voice. So thank you for that. I also want to ask people if they would tell us in the comments below if they have any raven or crow stories. We'd love to hear if you have an attachment or an aversion or an interest in either of these beautiful creatures, and just let us know in the comments below. We'd love to hear from you. And last but not least, I want to mention your Singing Earth, your program, The Dance of Yoga and Shamanism. It's a 35-hour course, and they can get all of the details on that immersion on your silverbow.ca. Is that correct?
Absolutely, right at the bottom of my yoga page, and then we have a page dedicated to give a little more information. And just that it's a Yoga Alliance course as well, in the sense that you can count those hours as Yoga Alliance continuing education hours. So it's an independent course, but it's a certificate course. And it wouldn't exist without having the privilege of teaching Whispered Wisdom all those years with David Tree. So I am deeply grateful.
We are so grateful for you. Your gifts are vast, and your heart is even vaster. New word, vaster.
Vastest.
And vastest, yes. Thank you so much, K-Bhava, for being with us today. And I'm sure we'll do this again. Maybe we'll pick some more animals and do this again soon.
They would love to be spoken of. They would love to be spoken of.
We love you. Mwah. Thank you, heaps and heaps.
Thank you.
Have a beautiful day.
And you.